is some sort of large style of lettering, which again doesn't look like the letters we have in the Sefer Torah, but again, so I think it was a 22-letter. I assume it was 22-letter alphabet of alphabets, but the lettering itself did not look like the lettering that we have nowadays. And now the Gemara is going to present the Brisa, which is going to offer three different opinions as to the origins of the style of writing of Sefer Torah. And the Gemara says as follows: Tanya, the Brisa says, Rabbi Yossi Omer, we are now 5 lines up from the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis 21b. Tanya, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Ra'oi Haya Ezra Shetinas in Torah al Yado the Yisrael. That Ezra was so great that it would have been appropriate for him to be the person who presented the Torah to the Jewish people. Ilmale Kadmu Moshe, had not Moshe preceded him and done so already. So where is there an allusion to this in the Psukim? So the Gemara says, B'Moshe hu Omer, in Parshas Yisro, when Moshe goes up to Har Sinai to receive the Luchos, the Pasuk says, Moshe Allah El HaElokim. Moshe went up to Har Sinai, to Hashem. And Be'ezra, we find a similar word, the word Allah being used. The Torah the Navi by Ezra says, Hu Ezra Allah mi Bavel. He was Ezra Allah. He went up from Babel to Eretz Yisrael. So the similar language, Ma Aliyah Ha'amor Kan Torah, just as the Aliyah, the word Allah, ascent, that the Torah uses when it refers to Moshe is referring to him going up, ascending Har Sinai, and perhaps also spiritually ascending to go get the Aser Sedibros, to get the Luchos from Hashem. So Af Aliyah Ha'amar Lahalan Torah. So to the Aliyah that it is said by Ezra refers to some sort of lofty level which Ezra achieved, and that also refers to the Torah. The Moshe hu Omer, another similarity between Moshe and Ezra. But Moshe hu Omer, it says in Parshas Dvarim, Moshe tells the Jewish people, "V'osi tziva Hashem bo'esahi," and I at that time Hashem charged me to teach you the different laws of the Torah. And by Ezra hu Omer, by Ezra it also says, Ki Ezra heichin levavo. He focused his heart, he focused himself, lidrosh es Torah Hashem, to seek out Hashem's Torah, v'la'asos ululamed b'Yisrael chok u'mishpat, and to teach the Jewish people chok u'mishpat, the different types of laws. So it uses a similarity of Moshe teaching the Jewish people chukim u'mishpatim, and Ezra as well teaching the Jewish people chukim u'mishpatim. So Rabbi Yossi says, you see that Ezra was on as great a level as Moshe, and he could have been the person who presented the Torah to the Jewish people. However, despite the fact that Moshe already gave it to the Jewish people, even though Ezra was not the one who actually presented it to the Jews, Nishtana al yado hakasav. It was through Ezra that the Jewish people were presented a different style of writing. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, the top of 22a, Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, Uksav hanishtavan kasu aramis and metorgam aramis. So a little bit of background here. The Gemara is bringing a pasuk from Sefer Ezra, and this is when the Bnei Yisrael began to. A group of Bnei Yisrael went up from Bavel and went to Eretz Yisrael to begin to build the second Beis Hamikdash. And it says there was a letter sent to the Persian king, which tried to stop that and say that the Jews are planning a rebellion and don't let them build the Beis Hamikdash and so on and so forth. So the pasuk says this letter was sent, and it says Uksav hanishtavan. It was a ksav, a style of writing which had been changed, which had been recently changed. It was Kasuv Aramis. It was written in Aramis. Now, up until now, we have not referred to a style of writing called Aramis. We've only referred to Ksav Ashuris, which is the type of writing we have in our Sefer Torah, and something called Ksav Ivri, which was this ancient type of style of writing. The pasuk here refers to Ksav Aramis, and the Mefarshim say Aramis, the Aramaic Ksav, was what we call Ksav Ashuris. It's the style of writing that we have now, and that was the ksav used by the people in that area of the world at that time. So it says the letter was written, there was a letter written in a style of language which was new to the people. The style of writing was new to them. It was Chasuv Aramis. It was written in what we would call Ksav Ashuris, this style of writing we have in our Sifrei Torah nowadays. Umeturgam Aramis, and the language of it was Aramaic, because that's what the people spoke. Uksiv, and there's another pasuk that says, Lo chahalein kisava lemikra. The writing was not able to be read, upshara lahoda lamalka, and its interpretation, its meaning, was not able to be explained to the king. This pasuk is referring to the famous event of the story of Belshazzar. Belshazzar was a Babylonian king, and he made a party. And when he was expecting the Beis Hamikdash, the second Beis Hamikdash, to be rebuilt, he had a calculation. He thought that it was going to be rebuilt. When that day did not come, he made a big party. He took out the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash, and he celebrated and said, God doesn't care about the Jews anymore, and he celebrated that. And it says, in the middle of the party, there was this hand that came down, and a hand began writing some sort of secret, spooky message on the wall. Nobody knew what that message was, and no one understood the message. So the Gemara says here, this Brisa understands, trying to understand why didn't people understand the writing that was on the wall? There were Jewish people around. Why didn't they understand the style of writing that was on the wall at the story with Belshazzar? So the Brisa suggests the reason they couldn't understand this writing was because this was a style of writing which until now they hadn't seen. It was a new style of writing which had just been presented to them right now. This hand began writing this new type of letters which the people had not seen, and nobody could read it, and that was the reason for it. And the Gemara puts these two psukim together. It says a few years later, when that letter was written, again, Belshazzar preceded Ezra. Belshazzar made this party, and years later, Ezra began with the Jewish people to actually return to Eretz Yisrael to build the second Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, you see that by Belshazzar, there was this letters on the wall that the people couldn't read. And now there's a pasuk by Ezra that says that there was this recently changed ksav. So the Brisa puts the two together and says, you see what happened was in the time of Ezra, that the style of writing the Jewish people were using was changed. And that fits with the pasuk, Uksiv, the Chasav is Mishnei HaTorah Hazos, which is why the Gemara brought this in. There's a pasuk by the Melech, by the king in Sefer Dvarim, and it says he should write the Mishnei HaTorah. So the word Mishnah can be related to a few different words. Here the Gemara is using it as a play on words. The word Mishnah is related to the word Shinoi, to change. So it says, you should write es Mishnei HaTorah Hazos, this changed Torah, or this Torah, this lettering, which will be changed. So the Brisa sees already in the Torah an allusion to the fact that the Torah was given with a certain type of ksav, a certain type of style of writing, and it was destined to change. And when did that change? It changed in the times of Ezra. And that is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi here in the Brisa. The Gemara says, Lama Nikra, because of its Mishnei HaTorah Hazos, Ksav Haroi Lehishtanos. It is a style of writing which was going to eventually be changed. Lama Nikra Ashuris, and now the Gemara interjects and says, where does this word come from, Ashuris, the style of writing that we have nowadays in our Sifrei Torah? We call it Ksav Ashuris. What is the word Ashuris? What does that mean? Where does it come from? So the Gemara says, Sha'ala imahem me Ashur. It's called that because it came up from the Jewish people. It came up with the Jewish people from the land of Ashur. Now the Gemara presents a second opinion about this matter. Tanya, Rebbe Omer. Rebbe said, Batchila b'ksav zeh nitna Torah liYisrael. Initially, when the Torah was given to the Jewish people, it was given to them with the style of writing that we have nowadays. Kevan shechatu, when they sinned during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, nepach lahem leroetz. The literally means like it turned into it shattered, or like it splintered. It means that they forgot how they became unfamiliar and they forgot this style of writing. Kevan shechazru lahem, when they did teshuvah and returned during the times of Ezra, hechziru lahem, Hashem returned to them this type of ksav, which they initially used in the Sifrei Torah, which we have nowadays called ksav ashuris. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Shuvu lebitzaram, return to your fortified city. Asiri hatikva, you prisoners, you Jewish people, you're prisoners of hope. Gam hayom magid mishne ashivlach. Today I will return to you, Hashem says, that which I said would change. So what does that mean? I will return to you that which I said would change. So the Gemara interprets that to be an allusion to this idea that there was in the Torah, when the Torah says v'kasav es mishnei haTorah hazos, that there's the style of writing would one day change. So the Gemara says it did change. It initially was given in Ashuris, and then the people forgot about it due to their sins in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash. And the style of writing changed, and they used a style of writing called Aramis. And then later on, in the beginning of the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, that initial style of writing, Ashuris, was returned to them. And now the Gemara gives a different explanation why it's called Ashuris. Lama nikra shema Ashuris. Why is it called Ksav Ashuris? Shema usheres b'ksav. Mu'ushar, it is the most nice, it is the best style of Ksav. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Parcha Sha'amar Mishum Rabbi Elazar Hamodai. The Gemara now gives a third possibility as to the history and unfolding of the Ksav, of the style of Hebrew writing. Ksav ze lo nishtane kol ikar. This Ksav, the style of writing that we see in our Sifrei Torah called Ksav Ashuris, it never changed. This was always the Ksav that the Jewish people had. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Vavei ha'amudim, which is a pasuk by describing the Mishkan. The amudim were the pillars in the Mishkan, and the vavim were these hooks which they used to attach the curtains onto the pillars of the Mishkan. So that's the literal meaning of the pasuk. Vavei ha'amudim, the hooks of the pillars. Vavim also sounds like the letter Vav, because it says the hooks were shaped like a Vav. So the Gemara uses this as a drasha in a deeper level of meaning, and it says, Ma amudim lo nishtanu, just as the amudim, the pillars that form the wall of the Mishkan, lo nishtanu, never changed. Af vavim lo nishtanu, so to the vavim, the letter vav, and so to all the other letters of the aleph base, lo nishtanu, they never changed. And the style of writing that they were given to, presented to the Bnei Yisrael at Matan Torah, that is the same way they have remained since that time. V'omer, and there's also a pasuk in the end of the Megillah. It says by Megillas Esther, Ve'el ha'Yehudim kichsavam b'chil shonam. There was a letter that was sent out to the Jewish people, and it says it was sent to them kichsavam, like their writing, v'chil shonam, like their language. So the Gemara says again, ma l'shonam lo nishtana, just as we know the Jewish language never changed, af ksavam, so to the style of writing, lo nishtana, never changed. So this third opinion is one maybe that we're more familiar with, is the opinion that says there was a certain style of writing which Hashem presented the Jewish people to at Har Sinai. And that was how the Torah was written then. And that's how the Torah has always been written. And that's the style of writing that all Sifrei Torah have ever been written in. So the Gemara says, well, if that's true, we all started this whole discussion with the pasuk, v'kasav es mishnei haTorah, that the Torah will be written in a certain style of writing, mishnei, which will be changed. So the Gemara says, how does this Tana understand that pasuk, v'kasav es mishnei haTorah? The style of writing in the Torah never changed. It was given in what's called Aramis, and it was given, in something called Ksav Ashuris, and it always remained in Ashuris. So what does the Torah mean when it says mishnei haTorah? So the Gemara says, Elamani Mekaimus Mishnei HaTorah Hazos. How do we understand the pasuk that says you should write this Mishnei HaTorah? So here the Gemara says what it said earlier. The word Mishneh, as I said earlier, can be related to the word shinoi, to change. It could also be related to the word shana, which means to repeat. And the Gemara says it could also mean Mishnei HaTorah, like a duplicate or a double Torah. And what is this double Torah that a person would need to write? Lishtei Toros. It is to the two Torahs that the king needs to write for himself. Achatz sheyotzav nechneses imo, one that the king takes with him wherever he goes, and one which he keeps in his private chamber. The one that he uses when he goes out to fight, that one he ties around his arm, and he uses it as kind of like a personal amulet. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. I will place Hashem before me at all times. Meaning, so to speak, I will place Hashem, the Torah, on my arm. The king says at all times. V'idach, and the other opinions who say that there would be no requirement for the king to have two Sifrei Torahs. Hi Shivisi my Darish Bey. How do they understand the pasuk Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid? I will have Hashem before me at all times. It's not referring to the king having a Sefer Torah with him at all times. What is it referring to? So the Gemara says, "Ahumi baile kid Rav Chana bar Bizna." The Amar Rav Chana bar Bizna, Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida. It's referring to the following halacha: Hamispalel, that when one davens, Sarich sheyira atzmo ki'ilu shchina kenegdo. They must envision and focus and think that the shchina is directly opposite them. Shenemar, as it says, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. I will place Hashem before me at all times. Okay, so the Gemara brought down three opinions here about the historical flow and changing of the style of writing. There was the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, who said that initially the Torah was given to the Jewish people with something called Ksav Ivri, and it changed over time to something called Ksav Ashuris. There was the opinion of Rebbe, who said it was given to the people in something called Ksav Ashuris. They forgot that Ksav, they became unfamiliar with it, and they began using a different type of Ksav. And then they reinstated what's called Ksav Ashuris, which is what we have nowadays. And then there's the third opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who said that the Ksav we have nowadays is the Ksav that we always had. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon, according to this latter opinion, the Amar Ksav Zelo Nishtana, that the style of writing never changed. Why then in the story of Belshazzar, at the party, when there was writing on the wall and there were Jewish people around, why couldn't they understand the writing? Earlier we said the reason they didn't understand the writing is because they weren't familiar with the style of the letters. But if the letters never changed, so then why didn't the people know what the writing was on the wall? When this hand began writing some message on the wall, no one knew what was going on. Why couldn't they read it if they were familiar with the letters all along? So the Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Bigematria ichtav lahon. The word here, gematria, does not mean what it usually means. Usually gematria means a numeric value, like Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, and so on. Here the Gemara just means it was written like in code. So the Gemara says, the reason why they couldn't understand the message on the wall was not because they were unfamiliar with the style of letters. It was because the message on the wall was written in like a code. What was the code? So the Gemara says the code was Yatat idach pug chamat. So my parshlu, what in the world does that mean? So the Gemara says it means minei tekel uparsin. Those were the words that were supposed to be conveyed to Belshazzar. Minei tekel uparsin. Now the Gemara explains what each of those words means. Minei, what does minei mean? Minei Eloha malchusach. That God has, from the word minyan, manoi, God has counted your kingship. Meaning God has decided that your kingship is over. God has counted the amount of time that you've been king, and it's over. Takil, God has weighed. Tekilta b'moznaya, He has weighed with the scales. V'ishtakcha chasir, and you have come out to be missing and lacking and short. Parsin, prisas malchusach, your kingship has been broken off. V'yahivas l'madayu paras, and the Babylonian empire is going to come to an end, and it's going to be taken over by Paras Umadai, Persia, and Media. Shmuel says, the way it was written on the wall was Mimitos nan kafi alarin. So what does that mean? If you take the first three letters of each of that acronym, Mimitos nan kafi alarin, so the first letter is Mem. The first letter of the second word is Nun. The first letter of the third word is Aleph. So that spells Minah. The second letter of the first word is Mem again. The second letter of the second word is Nun. The second letter of the third word is Aleph. Again, Menon. You do that all the way through. That will spell out, again, the same message. Menei, menei, tekelu parsin. So Shmuel says that's why they didn't understand what was written, because it was incoherent. The words didn't make any sense. But the letters they knew, they just didn't understand what the message was because it was written in this style of code. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, he says maybe the code was Anam Anam Lakat Nisrafu, which is again the same words, Menei Menei Tekelu Farsim, just backwards, right? Anam Anam is Mem Nun Aleph backwards. So again, it was written in a code that they didn't pick up on. And Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi says Nima Nama Kitel Porsin. Rav Ashi says it was written with the first two letters of each word interchanged. So the Menei, the Mem and the Nun switched around. Tikhail, the Tuf and the Kuf switched, and Ufar Sin, the Vav and the Pei changed. Okay, so that's the end of that. And I just want to say one thing here because it's really important. It's not exactly the scope to go into this, but the Gemara here has just presented three opinions about the history of the Ksav, of the way we have Sifrei Torah. And at first glance, it's interesting because according to two of the opinions here, the Ksav that we have has undergone a change. It says, according to the first opinion, Rabbi Yossi, Atana, in the Braisa, says that the Ksav we have now in the Sifrei Torah was not the Ksav that we were given at Har Sinai. And the Rishonim ask a big question here, which is, there's a famous Gemara in Megillah that says, Rashi brings us down on Chumash, and it says that there are certain letters in the Luchos that it says B'neis Hayu Omdim. It says the Mem and the Samach in the Luchos were B'neis Hayu Omdim. So what does that mean? So the Gemara says because they're complete letters, and if they go all the way around, then the middle part of the letter should have fallen out. And the Gemara says that they, through Nes, in the Luchos, they stood there. So all the Rishonim here are very bothered by this, and they say, well, what do you mean? If the Luchos and the Torah initially at Har Sinai was given to us in something called Ksav Ivri, so then what does that mean that the Mem and the Samach were B'nei Sayomdim? They were, the Mem and the Samach and Ksav Ivri don't look anything like they look in the Sifrei Torah we have now. So what was the big nes? And there are other questions they have about that, about the other Gemaras talk about the shape and the form of the letters as we know them now. And the Rishonim say, if you say, according to some opinions, that the Ksav, when it was presented to the Jewish people at Har Sinai, doesn't look like the Ksav we have now, that doesn't fit with those Gemaras. So one of the approaches given by some of the Rishonim is they just say, well, it's true, there is an opinion like that in the Braisa, but we don't paskin like that. We paskin like the third opinion in the Braisa, and the third opinion in the Braisa says the Ksav never changed. Indeed, there were Tanaim who believed the Ksav did undergo change, and we paskin, we rule, like the opinions who say the Ksav did not change. There are other answers given to deal with this problem, which we're not going to go into now. It's something to think about how that this Braisa and the opinions here are resolved with some of those famous midrashim and understandings of the styles of the letters. The final mission of the parak now goes into the halachos, some of the laws that apply to the Bnei Yisrael as in regards to the king, in terms of owing respect to the Jewish king. So the Mishnah begins and it says, "Ein rochman al suso." One is not allowed to use the king's horse to ride on. Vein yoshvan al kiso, and we can't sit on his throne. Vein mishtamshin b'sharvito, one cannot use his scepter. Vein ronas or kashuhu nistaper, one would not be allowed to see him while he's getting a haircut. V'lo kashuhu arum, or while he would be unclothed. V'lo kashuhu b'veis hamerchatz, or when he is or while he is bathing. Presumably, even though that's a normal time for him to be unclothed, it's still considered disrespectful. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, "Som tasim alecha melech." You should appoint for yourself a king, shetehe a masa alecha, so that his fear is upon you. You should be in awe and live in respect of the king, and therefore these halachos apply. So the Gemara begins and says, "Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Avishag muteres l'shlomo va'asur la'adonia." Avishag was a woman who was chosen to attend to David HaMelech at the end of David HaMelech's life. And the Gemara says that after David HaMelech died, he had a son named Adoniah. Adoniah was the half-brother of Shlomo HaMelech. They shared the same father, David HaMelech. They had a different mother. And the Navi tells us in Sefer Malachim that after David HaMelech died, Adoniah wanted to marry Avishag wanted to marry this woman who had helped David HaMelech towards the end of his life. And Shlomo HaMelech saw that as a potential threat to the throne. He saw that as a potential rebellion, and he had Adoniah put to death for that. So the Gemara comments and says that in truth, Adoniah would not have been allowed to marry Avishag. Shlomo HaMelech, had he wanted to, he would have been permitted to marry her. So why is this? So the Gemara says, Muteris l'Shlomo. She was permitted to marry Shlomo. Demelech haya, because Shlomo was the king. He succeeded his father, David. Umelech mishtamish b'sharvito shemelech. And one king can use the scepter of another king. Obviously, she was a human, not an object, but the point is that she attended to David. She helped David out. So the Gemara is comparing that to something which the king uses, so to speak. So just like a king is allowed to use a king's scepter, the king would be allowed to use for his own purposes and get benefit from the person who aided and helped another king. Va'asur la'Adoniah. She was not allowed to marry Adoniah, who again was the half-brother of Shlomo HaMelech, the other son of David HaMelech, because Va'asur la'Adoniah, dehed yotu, because Adoniah was not meant to be the king. So the Gemara says, Avishag Mahi. Who is this woman? What's the background? Diksiv, the pasuk says, V'hamelech David zakin ba bayamin. David got old. Vayomru lo avodav yivakshu na'ara. And his helpers, the people there, the servants said, why don't we find a woman, somebody who can take care of the king? Uksiv, and it says, Vayivakshu na'ara yafa. And they found this beautiful woman, and Uksiv, V'hanar yafa ad me'od, v'atihi lamelech sochenes v'atishar seyu. That she was very beautiful, and she helped warm the king, and she attended to the king, and that was her job. So the Gemara now gives a background to something that occurred between David HaMelech and Avishag. Amra, she suggested to David HaMelech, Ninsavan, let us get married. Amar la, David HaMelech said to her, seriously, you are forbidden to me, I'm not allowed to marry you. Because Rashi says David HaMelech had 18 wives, and the king's not allowed to have more than 18 wives. So he said, I can't marry you, I'm not allowed to. So Amrle, she said to him, Chasre legan vanafshe l'shlomo nakit, which is like an expression. Chasre legan vanafshe. If the thief doesn't have anyone to steal from, l'shlomo nakit. He pretends like he's a peaceful guy, which means she says to him, you're old, and you're not physically able to be married and be in a physical relationship of sexual relations. So she says, you're using that as an excuse instead of saying that that's really the reason you can't marry me. You're using that as an excuse, and you're just saying, oh, really, I can't marry you because I have too many wives. So that's what she says to David HaMelech. She says, no, really, you could marry me, and you're just using that as an excuse. So David HaMelech says to her, Amar lahu, he says, Kiru li Bathsheba. He really says to his attendants, bring Bathsheba in. I'm summoning Bathsheba, who was his wife, Uksiv, and the pasuk says, Vatavo Bathsheba el Hamelach hachadra. Bathsheba came hachadra to his room, which the Gemara understands means like to a private room. Amar of Yehuda Amarav. Yehuda Amarav said, Ba'os Shah at that time, Kincha Bathsheba b'shlosh esrei mapos. That David HaMelech and Bathsheba had marital relations. Says they had marital relations 13 times, and Bathsheba wiped herself. She wiped herself to check that there was no blood occurring after those events, and she did that 13 times. And the Rashi explains the reason where the Gemara get the number 13 from. There are 13 words in that pasuk that say Bathsheba came to David HaMelech's room. There were 13 words in the pasuk. Refers to the 13 acts of marital relations which David and Bathsheba had to, so to speak, prove to Avishag that David HaMelech was capable of doing that. And the reason why he couldn't marry Avishag was because he had 18 wives and he couldn't marry anymore. Amar Rav Shemin bar Abba. Rav Shemin bar Abba said, Bo re'eh kama kashin gerishin. He observes from this story that it's interesting to note, you see that how severe that we view getting divorced. Why? Shahare David HaMelech hitiru lo liyached. There was a permit given to him to be alone, together with Avishag when she was caring for him, which should have been a violation of yichud, of being alone with another woman. V'lo hitiru lo legarish, but they did not permit him instead to just divorce one of his wives and then marry her. So you see that between the two, secluding himself and being alone with an unmarried woman, or getting divorced and then marrying her, which one was chosen? The one that would the option which was chosen was that they be together alone instead of just divorcing one of his other wives and marrying her. And now on that, the Gemara is going to bring down a few comments about the concept of divorce. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Kol megarish as ishtar rishona, afilu mizbeach mordal of demos. Anyone who divorces his first wife, afilu mizbeach mordal of demos. The mizbeach, so to speak, cries for the person. Shnemar, as the pasuk says, v'zos shenis tasu, and you should do the following thing again. Kesos dima es mizbach Hashem. Cover the mizbeach of Hashem with tears, b'chi, crying, va'anaka, and like sighing, me'ein od penos al hamincha, that I will no longer turn to your karbanos, your mincha offerings, ulakachta ritzon miyedchem, or take them favorably from your hands. Uksiv, and the pasuk after that says, va'amartem, and you will say, alma, why is this happening? Why is the mizbeach, so to speak, crying, and Hashem rejecting the offerings? Al ki Hashem heid beincho bein eshes nu'urecha, because Hashem has testified about you and the wife of your youth, Asher ata bagadata ba, which you have acted against her, v'hi chavertecha, and she is your companion, she is your friend, v'eshes brisecha, and the wife of your covenant. Amar Rabbi Yochanan v'itema Rabbi Elazar, ein ishto shel adam mesa, ela im kein mevakshin mimenu mamun. A person's wife only dies if the person owes money, and it literally means if they ask a person for money and he doesn't have. So the meaning of this elsewhere in the Gemara says that doesn't mean they ask him for money and he doesn't want to give, or he can't pay. It means that a person stole, they did something wrong, and now they're coming to them to reclaim the money that is owed to them, and the person can't pay back, and their wife was involved in assisting in that theft. So the Gemara says, as a punishment for that, a person's wife could die. Where do we see an allusion to this in the pasuk? Shenamar, the pasuk says, "Vim ein lachal shalem." If you don't have with what to pay, lama yikach mishkavcha mitachtecha. Why should your bed, meaning your wife, be taken out from under you? V'am Rabbi Yochanan, kol adam shemesa ishtar rishona ki ilu charav beis hamikdash b'yamav. A person who loses their wife during their lifetime, it's as if the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed in their lifetime. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Ben Adam. This is a pasuk where Hashem is talking to Yechezkel Hanavi, and he's talking to him about the destruction, the impending destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. And the pasuk says, Ben Adam, Hineni lokeach mimcha es machmad einecha b'magefa. I'm going to take the thing that you treasure the most, I'm going to take it in a plague. And Yechezkel Hanavi, his wife died, and Hashem tells him that. And Hashem tells him, Lo tispeid v'lo tivkeh v'lo sablo d'masecha. I don't want you to show any outward signs of mourning. Why was this done? Uksiv va'adaber al ha'am baboker. Va'adaber is Yechezkel talking. Yechezkel then says, I spoke to the Jewish people in the morning. V'tamas ishti ba'erev, and that evening my wife died. Uksiv, and the pasuk says, Hineni mechalel es mikdashi. I will. You have all desecrated my Beis Hamikdash. Geonuschem machmad einechem, the most treasured thing that you have, and therefore the Gemara says Hashem told Yechezkel, I want your wife is going to die, and you're not going to show any signs of outward avelos. The same way that when the Jewish people die, this is going to be symbolic, of the Jewish people losing the Beis Hamikdash, and there are going to be no people, the Jewish people won't be able to observe Avelos. Why is that? Avelos can only be observed when there are people who are not Avelim to come offer consolation and comfort, Nechama, to the people who are Avelim. So Hashem says to Yechezkel, something so tragic, the Beis Hamikdash is going to be lost, and there are going to be no Avelim. They're going to be no Avelim because everyone is going to experience this. There's going to be no one to comfort the Jewish people because all Jewish people are going to be equal in suffering the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, you see this comparison between Yechezkel losing his wife and the Jewish people losing the Beis Hamikdash. Amar, we're up to the last thin line on the Amud. Amar Rabbi Alexandri. Rabbi Alexandri said, Kol Adam Shemesa Ishto B'Yamav, anyone whose wife dies during their days, Olam Chashach Ba'ado, their world is darkened. Shenemar, the pasuk says, Ur Chashach Ba'ahalo, the light in their tent has dimmed. V'nero olav yidach, and their candle above them has extinguished. And Ohel, the tent, the mainstay of the tent is the woman. So the Gemara sees it as the Gemara says, Ur Chashach, his light has diminished. Be'ahalo literally means in his tent. The Gemara understands it means be'ahalo means like on account of his tent, on account of losing his wife, the light in his world has become darkened. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says, Pisiosav miskatzros, a person's steps are shortened, means a person loses strength if their wife passes away. Shenemar, the pasuk says, Yetzru tza'adei ono, my steps of power have been shortened. Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Abahu says, Atsaso nofelas, a person's advice falls. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Vatashlichehu atsaso, and his advice will cast him down. Amar Rabba Bar Barchana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Bar Barchana says the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Kasha lezavgam kikriyas yamsuf. It is difficult to match a man and a woman up to be married. It is as difficult as Kriyas Yamsuf was. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Elokim Moshiv Yechidim Beisa. Hashem Moshiv Yechidim. He places individuals, Beisa, in a house, meaning to be married together. And then it says, Motzi Asirim Bakosharos. He takes out the Asirim, the prisoners. So the Gemara sees this linking in the pasuk between Hashem placing individuals in a home, which means uniting a husband and wife to be a married couple, and taking out the prisoners as a connection that doing those acts are similarly difficult, so to speak, for Hashem. So the Gemara asks, we're going to skip the parentheses and go to the end of the line where the Gemara says, Eini. Eini, is that so, that it's so difficult for Hashem to set people up? We know that the Gemara says that 40 days before a person is born, there's a baskol, a heavenly voice that goes out, and it says that two people are destined to get married to each other. So it sounds like everything is just, it sounds like it's predetermined. It's not a difficult thing at all. It's decided before a person's married who they're going to marry. So the Gemara says, Lo kasha. These two statements don't contradict each other. They're really referring to two different stages. Ha b'zivug rishon, ha b'zivug sheni. One is referring to the zivug rishon, the Gemara, the statement which says that a heavenly voice goes out and it proclaims who the person is going to marry. That's talking about a person's first match, the first person they marry. Zivug sheni, if a person has to marry a second person, so then that's based on what's called ma'asav, matching the people up based on their personality, and that is very difficult, so to speak. The Gemara says that's not an easy thing to do. Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani. Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman, Lakol yesh temura chutz me'eshes nurim. There is a substitute for everything except for the wife of one's youth. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, ve'eshes nurim kisi ma'es, and the wife of your youth, like, will you cast her off? Will you find her disgusting? Masni la Rabbi Yehuda la Rabbi Yitzchak. So now a story based on that. Rabbi Yehuda told this to Rabbi Yitzchak Berei, who was his son. They were learning this, and he said, "Ein adam motze koras ruach ela mi'ishta rishona." A person only finds peace of mind from their first wife. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "Yihi makor chabaruch." Your source should be blessed. Usmach me'eshes nurecha, and you should rejoice at the with the wife of your youth. So Amar Lo, so Rabbi Yitzchak said to his father, Kagon man, what is an example of this? So Amar Lo, so Rabbi Yehuda responded, Kagon imcha. That's referring to your mother. So just when you thought that was nice and heartwarming, get ready for the next part. So the Gemara asks Amy, V'hamakri le Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yitzchak Berei. The Gemara says there's another story about the same two people, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yitzchak, and they're learning together. And Rabbi Yehuda says, Umotze ani mar mimavis. I have found something which is more bitter than death itself. Esa isha asher hi mitzudim v'charam. A woman who is, basically out to get you. V'amar lo, and his son said to him, Kigon man, who's that referring to? V'amar lo, and he said to him, Kigon imcha. It's talking about your mother. So the Gemara says, what kind of woman was this? Like, what's going on here? So the Gemara says, miskaf tekifa. The word takif, like difficult, hard. She was strong. So it says she had a very, very strong personality. However, ivure ma'avra b'milei, she overcame those inherent instinct character traits. So when he said to him, when he was describing the difficult personality, he was saying, what type of person is your mother inherently? What type of character, what type of woman is she? This is the type of woman that she is. How does she behave? How does she act? She gives me karas ruach. She gives me satisfaction and ease of mind because she overcame those innate character traits of herself. Amar Shmuel bar Unya, Mishmei Rav. Rav Shmuel says, Isha golami, a woman is an unfinished vessel. Ve'ena kores as bris el lemisha asa kli. She only forges a bond of and a connection with the one who makes her into a vessel. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Ki bo alayich osayich Hashem tzvako shemo. Bo alayich osayich, your husband is your creator. It is Hashem. That's a pasuk referring to Hashem's relationship with the Jewish people. So it calls Hashem your bo alayich, your husband, and osayich, he is your creator. So the Gemara says, so too in the parallel between a man and a woman, the man being the husband, Yotzrayach is, so to speak, the creator. He makes the woman into a vessel. Tana, the Brisa says, Ein ish meis ela ishto. A man only dies to his wife, which means the most significant feeling when a man passes away of loss is felt by the widow, by the wife. Ve'ein isha meisa ela labala, and the opposite is true as well with the woman dying for the man. Ein ish meis ela ishto. Where is that concept found that the woman feels the loss of her husband the most? Shenemar, the pasuk says, "Vayamas Elimelech ish Naomi." Elimelech died, and who was Elimelech? Ish Naomi. He was the husband of Naomi. Naomi felt it the most. Ve'ein isha meisa el labal, and a woman only dies; it's felt the most by her husband. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "Va'ani b'voimi Padan." Yaakov Avinu says to the Shvatim, when we came from Padan, Mesa alai Rachel. Rachel died alai. She died on me, meaning it was felt the most by me. Ein roan or so. The Gemara is not going to comment on the halachos that we saw in the Mishnah. You're not allowed to view the king while he's getting a haircut. So the Gemara says, Tan Rabbanan, Melech mistaper b'chol yom. A king is supposed to get a haircut every day. Kohen Gadol me'erev Shabbos la'erev Shabbos. Kohen Gadol gets a haircut once a week. Kohen Hedyot, a regular Kohen, echad l'shloshim yom, once every 30 days. Melech mistaper b'chol yom. Where do we know that a king gets a haircut every day? Shenemar, the pasuk says, Melech b'yafyav techazena inecha. The king in his beauty, you will see him, and therefore he should get a haircut every day. Kohen Gadol me'erev Shabbos. Kohen Gadol gets a haircut once a week in Erev Shabbos. Where do we know this? Amar of Shmuel bar Nachman, Amar of Yochanan. Hol mishmaros mischadshos. Since the shifts of the Kohanim change every Shabbos, so it would be respectful for the incoming Kohanim to see the Kohen Gadol nicely groomed. So the Kohen Gadol gets the haircut every week on Friday specifically. So the incoming Kohanim on Shabbos see him that way. Kohen Hedyot echad l'shloshim yom. Kohen Hedyot gets a haircut once every 30 days. 45. Diksiv, the pasuk says, V'rosham lo yigalechu. The Kohanim, their hair they should not shave. Upera lo yishalechu. They should not let it grow wild either. Kasom yiksim os rashayim. They should trim the hair of their heads. V'yalef pera. The Torah also uses the word pera, mi nazir, by nazir. Ksiv hacha, it says here, and this is a pasuk from Yechezkel. It says in Sefer Yechezkel, pera lo yishalechu. The Kohanim should not let their hair grow pera, let it grow wild. Uksiv hasam, and it says in the Torah, gadel pera sa'arosho. The nazir lets his hair grow pera, wild. Ma lahalon shloshim, just as the nazir allows his hair to grow for 30 days, afkan shloshim. So too, the wild growing hair that the Kohanim cannot do also means not exceeding 30 days. Utananami, the Mishnah says by a nazir, stam naziros shloshim yom. A nazir, the minimum amount that a person would be a nazir would be 30 days. V'hasam minalan, and where's the source for that in the Torah? Amar Masna, the Amar Kar, the pasuk says, kadosh yihiyeh, b'gematria tlasan havu. The word used by the Nazir, it says kadosh yihiyeh, his hair should be holy, and yihiyeh, the numerical value of yihiyeh, yud and hey is 30. So we see that the minimum amount that a Nazir, a person says they're going to become a Nazir, they would be a Nazir for 30 days. So just as the Nazir is supposed to let his hair grow wild and minimum is 30 days, the Kohanim, same word used by the Kohanim are not allowed to let their hair grow wild for longer than 30 days. Amalei Papa Labai, so Papa said to Abaye, Ema lo lirbu klal. How do we know it means that the Kohanim have to get a haircut once every 30 days? Maybe it means that they can't even let their hair grow 30 days, meaning they should have to get a haircut sometime before that, like on day 29. So Amar Le Abaye says, you're right. Iksiv lo yishalechu pera kidduka amr. If Yecheskel wrote lo yishalechu pera, then kidduka amr, it would be as you, Reb Papa, are suggesting, that they are not allowed to let their hair get to a 30-day growth, which means they have to cut it before day 30. Hashta diksiv, however, the wording is reversed in the pasuk. It says, upera lo yishalechu. Wild, lo yishalechu, it shouldn't grow. Pera lahave, it's allowed to get to a day 30 growth. Shaluche lo l'shalchu. They should not exceed that. Am I going to use that? Okay. Oh, that's it? Fine. Okay, all right. I apologize. We didn't. It's 5 minutes here. But which one am I following? Okay, fine. Okay. So the Gemara asks the following thing. The Gemara is going to say, if we know that there's a prohibition for Kohanim to allow their hair to grow longer, they must get a haircut once every 30 days. The Gemara says, Ihachi ha'idnanami. Why isn't this true nowadays? Why aren't Kohanim forbidden to allow their hair to grow more than once every 30 days? So the Gemara says, Dumya deyayin, because the prohibition on allowing their hair to grow is similar to the prohibition of drinking wine. Mayayin bisman bia huda asur shlo bisman bia shari. Just as wine is only prohibited for Kohanim when there is a Beis Hamikdash, bisman bia, when they can go into the Beis Hamikdash, af perue rosh. So to allowing their hair to grow, bisman bia asur, when there's a Beis Hamikdash, it's asur for them to allow their hair to grow. Shelo bisman bia shari, but when there's no Beis Hamikdash, Kohanim have no restrictions on when they need to get haircuts. So the Gemara asks, the yain shelo bisman bia shari, is that true that Kohanim are not allowed to drink wine even when there's no Beis Hamikdash? V'hasanya, the Brisa says, Rebbe says, Omer ani Kohanim asurim lishtos yain lo'olam. Rebbe says, if you ask me, I think Kohanim, forever, even in the absence of the Beis Hamikdash, should not be allowed to drink any wine. Why? However, he says, what can I do? The exact thing which is kalkalasa, which is messing them up, meaning the lack of having a Beis Hamikdash and not knowing at any moment when the Beis Hamikdash may return and they may be reinstated to do the avoda, that exact reason, which is logic for them not to drink wine nowadays, so that they shouldn't be intoxicated, lest the Beis Hamikdash come suddenly and they'll have to be reinstated to do the service. So he says, that exact thing, takanaso, that is what's helping them. So Rashi explains what Rebbe means is like this. He says, really, I believe that Kohanim shouldn't be allowed to drink wine, because at the drop of a hat, the Beis Hamikdash might come and they might get called and they might have to go and they can't do the avoda if they're intoxicated. However, since it's been so long that the Beis Hamikdash has not been rebuilt, he says, I'm not concerned that, believe it or not, suddenly it will be rebuilt, enough to make a gezerah to say that the Kohanim shouldn't have to drink wine. So he says, really, the Kohanim shouldn't be allowed to, but because we've been in absence of Beis Hamikdash for so long, they really can, because we haven't seen that it's come back. V'amar Abaye, so Abaye says, well then, Keman Shasi Kahana Chamra Ha'idna, based on what do Kohanim drink wine nowadays? Kirebi, it's based on this opinion of Rebbe, that Kohanim are allowed to drink wine because it's been so long since the Beis Hamikdash has been around. Michlal, this implies. The Rabbanon Asri, that the Rabbanon forbid Kohanim to drink wine. And the reason for that is because, as we said earlier, we don't know. They may be reinstated at any time to the Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says, if it's true, according to the Kohanim, according to the Rabbanon, that Kohanim are not allowed to drink wine out of fear that if the Beis Hamikdash gets rebuilt, they will be in a state where they can't do the service. So Kohanim should also be restricted by those laws governing haircuts. And they should have to get haircuts once every 30 days because the Beis Hamikdash is reinstated. We can't have them having hair which is longer than a 30-day growth. So the Gemara says no. Hasam hainu taima. Mehera yibana Beis Hamikdash. Uba'inan kohen haroi la'avoda. The reason why they can't drink wine is if the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, we need a kohen who is in a state of being able to do the service, the leka. And if he's intoxicated, he can't. So the Gemara says, well, by that logic, hachanami here as well. Ba'ina kohen haroi la'avoda v'leka. It's the same thing by the haircut. If he doesn't get a haircut once every 30 days, he won't be in a position to do the service. So the Gemara says, no, haircuts are different. You can get a haircut at the drop of a hat. So the Gemara says, you can't just get sober very quickly. Last line, Hasam Nami, the Gemara suggests, Efshir Denayim Porta. You can take a little nap. The Amar of Acha, Rav Acha said, Derech Mil V'Sheina Kol Shu Mefigen Esayayin. A short nap dissipates the effects of the wine. So you could do that as well. V'lav Itmar Allah, the Gemara says, that's not so simple. Amar of Nachman, Amar Rabbi Ravua, Lo Shanu Ala Shashasa K'dei Revius. That's only if you drink a little bit of wine. Avol Yosim K'dei Revius. If you drink a lot of wine, Kol Shekain T'derech Todarto V'Sheina Meshakarto. The more you sleep, brings on the effects of the wine. And therefore, because of that, the Gemara concludes that that is why Kohanim, according to the Tanna Kama, would not be allowed to drink wine. According to Rebbe, they are, which is what the halacha is. And the reason why, according to the Rabbanan, there is no prohibition of Kohanim allowing the hair to grow is because that, in the effect that the Beis Hamikdash would be rebuilt suddenly, they would be able to fix that by getting a haircut.
Rebbe's logic doesn't make sense.